Hi, everyone. I'm Reena, Ninan. Thank you for joining us. It's back to the drawing board after the Senate failed to pass a bill to reopen the government on day 34 of the shutdown.
The motion is not agreed to.
First, the Senate voted 50 to 47 on the Republican plan, which included $5.7 billion for the president's border wall. Republican Senators Mike Lee and Tom Cotton voted against the bill. Then the Senate took up a vote, 52-44, on the Democrats' plan, which did not include funding for the wall. 6 Republican senators crossed the aisle to vote for the bill. Neither reached the 60-vote threshold to pass. Joining me now, Sabrina Siddiqui is a reporter for The Guardian and a CBSN political contributor. Sabrina, so that Democratic proposal actually got 6 Republican senators to come forward across the aisle and vote on this. What do we know about this vote?
Well, I think it certainly speaks to the fact that you're starting to see some cracks within the GOP when it comes to the president's position on the shutdown. There are more Republicans than we initially knew who are willing to support a clean funding bill, so a bill that would reopen the government without the president's demand for $5.7 billion toward the construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's still not enough, but it's a sign that there may be more pressure on the president to back down from his demand for the border wall and to come up with something that will be more palatable to Democrats in Congress.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty significant. Those senators were Alexander, Collins, Gardner, Isaacson, Murkowski, and Romney. So do you think the White House might read this as potential pressure that they need to somehow come to an agreement, or is that not really how it works with the White House?
Well, it's not always been the way it works with this president in particular. As we know, the border wall was central to his campaign for president, and that's part of how we got in this place to begin with, that he was willing to shut down the government over a border wall, even when Republicans had signaled that they would support a clean government funding bill. In fact, we were talking about this earlier today, that Republicans in the Senate voted for a spending bill that would have averted a shutdown and did not include funding for the wall. But this was a way for Mitch McConnell to prove to the White House that the proposal they put forward does not have the necessary votes to pass. And that, of course, was offering temporary protections for Dreamers, the young undocumented immigrants who were brought here legally as children, and some other protections for temporary protected status holders, those from vulnerable countries, in exchange for funding for the wall. That bill, of course, the one supported by the White House, also fell short. So now they go back to the drawing board. But again, this all comes down to the president and whether or not he's going to continue to insist on the wall, even as this shutdown is in its 34th day.
When you look at the president's proposal, there was actually one Democrat, Manchin, who crossed party lines to vote for President Trump's plan. But there were 2 Republicans, Cotton and Lee, who actually voted against the president's plan at that point. Should the White House be concerned? Just what we saw, we didn't expect that many votes in the Senate to be against it, that these Republicans would be against it on the record, even though they knew it would fail. And also to see these 2 voting against the president as well on the president's proposal.
Well, that was actually part of the problem for the president when he first laid out in a speech from the White House on Saturday this proposal that included some concessions directed toward Democrats, that for some conservatives, especially a hardliner like Tom Cotton, any protection for Dreamers, any legal status for some of these immigrants who are TPS holders or who the hardliners think should not be given any reprieve is viewed as quote-unquote amnesty. When the president unveiled that proposal, you had the likes of Ann Coulter immediately saying in public that we're just going to give them amnesty in order to get some money for the wall, sort of deeming that as a non-starter. So given that the president has ultimately framed his position around his base, where the White House should be concerned is that even the little bit that they were willing to give in terms of DACA, some temporary status, that was rejected outright by his most ardent supporters. And I think that's what you saw in, those 2 Republicans voting against the president's plan.
But couldn't the president also flip this around and said, look, I was willing to make a great compromise that isolated some of these conservatives, even some of my own party faithful to come forward. Shouldn't the Democrats offer something more on this border wall?
I think that there's something to be said for the fact that, yes, the president could make the case that he put a proposal on the table that did at least attempt to include some Democratic priorities. But there's sort of two things that Democrats have said. One is that temporary status for Dreamers does not lift the cloud of uncertainty that looms over these young undocumented immigrants. And also, the whole reason that Dreamers, as well as those temporary protected status holders who are from countries such as Haiti and El Salvador, tens of thousands of people who lost their status, the only reason they're Sudan, the only reason they're in that position is because the president rescinded their protections. So that's sort of a crisis of his own making. And the other response you're getting from Democrats is that, look, 7 in 10 Americans don't believe that a border wall is worth a government shutdown. A majority of the American public does not even believe a border wall is necessary, and a lot of research shows that it would be ineffective. So the idea that they should be allocating money towards something that is essentially a pet project of the president's just to put federal workers or put federal employees back to work, that position is not one that is supported by the majority of the American public. So they do believe they have the upper hand. But again, there's a lot of pressure now, especially as you're starting to see the impacts of the shutdown manifest themselves across the country.
Yeah, we are seeing those impacts. Sabrina, Friday will be the second pay period that federal workers will miss. What's the message to them? Is there any reason for them to be hopeful that maybe next Friday they will get paid?
Well, so far, as we've seen, there's no end in sight. I think if there is any glimmer of hope, it's sort of ironic to say the failure of 2 competing proposals should offer that. But what it does mean is for the first time since the shutdown began, the Senate has at least held a vote to show or to demonstrate where both sides stand. And that sends a message then back to the White House about what is actually feasible in terms of a resolution. But again, it comes down to whether or not the president is going to back down from this demand that Democrats allocate money toward the wall. I do think that as you start to see these ripple effects at airports across the country, as food and drug inspections are imperiled, as you have some services that will be threatened, such as the delivery of food stamps and other security programs, as well as the fact that tax season is around the corner and the IRS has very real questions as to whether or not it could process those refunds in time, that's going to start to put even more pressure on both lawmakers in Congress as well as the White House to reach some sort of resolution and to reopen the government.
Sabrina Siddiqui. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us this entire afternoon.